Hello, everyone. My name is Mohammed al Riffai. I'm an architect with Moriyama and Teshima Architects based out of Ottawa, Canada. I completed a degree in engineering at the American University in Cairo. One of the campuses, which happened to be where I had most of my lectures, the entrance to that campus was actually defined by the library. I didn't know it at the time, but this library really was my first kind of encounter with modern architecture in Cairo, having grown up in the city with, you know, millennia of architectural histories surrounding me. This was a intensely modern building with no references to the past, and it was actually a building designed by a famous American architect, Hugh Newell Jacobson, who trained under Louis Kahn. Louis Kahn is this kind of also kind of a modernist master, who himself designed, a very famous library in Exeter. And this library borrowed a lot from Louis Kahn's style of simplicity of material, very intensely modern, but at the same time, it really is a space that evoked a strong sense of spirituality. The library not only it was honest in its use of materials. It's really just stripped down concrete, but it evoked a wonderful sense of enclosure and warmth. The library physically projected a trellis, a large concrete trellis, that actually also created kind of an exterior plaza element outside of itself. So even as you sat outside the library, you were enclosed, and you felt this kind of sense of connection through that element. But when you're inside the library, I think most of all that was part of the interest, is that once you were inside, you had a chance to look out and look at the remainder of the campus and kind of reflect on what you're doing there. So unlike libraries that really try to kind of create this sense of focus and calm through shutting you off from your surroundings, this library really opened the view to the campus completely. And surprisingly, that created this really great sense of calm. You could feel connected to what was happening outside, but also feel a sense of purpose. The potential for libraries to influence or impact the user's passion for learning and exploration, drives the interest or drives the reward as well in designing a library. You're designing a building that has this really significant role in the development of human knowledge. Also, the ability for this knowledge to have a civic face vis-a-vis the library itself. So the library itself becomes a face of that knowledge and develops kind of a civic identity. That in itself is also a very rewarding act, to be able to create a space that's so universal in its use and so intuitive in its functionality that you don't have to think of language barriers, cultural barriers, social barriers. It's a space that really breaks down all these barriers to allow unfettered access to knowledge. In a modern world, I think or in a digital world, let's say, this type of space is even more important. In the past, I suppose libraries would have physically tried to create bunker-like environments that would have protected and sheltered their contents from the elements. And so libraries have developed to kind of really have that function of protection, which often was in conflict with the openness and the kind of type of space that people need in order to feel at ease and in order to kind of feel connected to their kind of surroundings. Libraries don't have to do that anymore. The books by nature are archived. There's multiple copies of these books. As a whole, libraries have become a lot more open. And again, especially with the advent of digital tools, libraries all of a sudden now don't really have to be as concerned with that, but they have to really try to open up a way for users to feel connected. There's a disconnect that happens where people really have to immerse themselves into this medium, into the screen, and by doing so, you're disconnected from your surroundings. And so I suppose a library in the modern world has to kind of repair that as well, has to kind of make sure that as users seek access through screens and through digital forms, libraries are still able to maintain that connectivity, to maintain, I guess, our humanity and our connection to one another. So more and more we're seeing the type of quiet, no noise, no food or drink type space slowly. I don't want to say disappear, but they still have those types of spaces are obviously still needed in libraries, but a library is not entirely like that anymore. It's really layered in the type of spaces that it has to provide now. And we like to think of it always when we come to look at libraries, we're always imagining what the functions are at the ground plane, which is the most social and interactive level of a library. And that's where you might expect to hear more noises or see different types of public activities and presentations and so forth. And as you move up into a library, up through the levels, perhaps then it starts to become more and more focused and more quiet, and the spaces really lend themselves more to reflection and quiet learning and introspection. So I suppose that public function of a library, the library as a living room, the library as a social space, as a community center, these are all kind of there, I believe, both as a result of digital kind of tools and technologies, but also they need to be there to balance out some of the negative aspects of learning through screens. Again, we spoke about the need to create community spaces that can sustain kind of learning collectively, learning collaboratively, learning as a whole, and opening up libraries as marketplaces for exchanges of ideas. It also really then, when we look at knowledge this way, we start to want to see libraries that are even more porous and libraries that are even, we spoke about the ground level or the level where a library interfaces with its surroundings. In the case of a campus, for example, you'd want to see kind of that accessibility and that interconnection at the campus level become more and more transparent. We'd want to see people seamlessly enter a library space as an extension of their kind of day-to-day campus activities, and then from there be able to filter through the various functionalities and the various spaces, the various types of knowledge access available, and access that seamlessly, and that transition between the campus and the library, also between the city and the library. We want that transition to really be blurred. I mean, if we could really try to imagine what a library would be in the future, it would be a space that can anticipate technology by providing a high level of porosity and a high level of architectural flexibility. A library, nobody can predict technology 50 years from now. Nobody can predict with accuracy anyways, models of learning 50 years from now, but we can certainly develop a library that is flexible, and we know that we're accelerating in terms of our modes of accessing information, and we're accelerating in the way that we're able to disseminate knowledge. And so the library has to anticipate the future by becoming highly flexible, by providing flexibility in planning. I think even the physical envelope of the building needs to be flexible to be able to accommodate updates to kind of improve its interaction or efficiency with the environment, its porosity, being able to kind of be able to be modified depending on what happens around it. So I think flexibility would be key to allow the library to kind of be able to adjust to whatever type of technology emerges. So I suppose I would say that we would imagine a library of the future as being a very flexible fabric that relies on the users and relies on the operators of the library to be constantly seeking to update it. And so the library provides a canvas really for evolution, let's put it this way, where it doesn't lock you in, it doesn't lock the user, it doesn't lock the operator into a static way of learning. I guess we can't speak about libraries without speaking about the threats to our kind of future. I mean, we did speak about the drawbacks of learning from screens and the drawbacks of learning through digital tools that have a potential to be alienating and disassociating. The other threat to ourselves and the libraries have to kind of maintain and check is the threat to our environment, and our planet. And so really, how can libraries become more sustainable, more responsible, use materials that are less toxic, create less of a drain on our planet, are healthy to be in. And I suppose libraries, like many buildings, or like any architecture actually, needs to be able to kind of address that question and make sure that it's a space of can remain relevant as we kind of develop as our societies and grow our societies to maintain a balance between the needs of the library and the needs of our environment and our planet. Pandemics, if we listen to the scientists that tell us that pandemics are going to be more and more frequent as our incursions into nature happen more frequently because of our population, then also we need to be able to reinforce this need to be together in a time of crisis. And again, the focus will be on public spaces, on community spaces, and I consider libraries to be such a space that's critical, and it's kind of an essential space. Let's say that we'd like to make sure that libraries of the future are planned as essential spaces that don't shut down in times of need, in times of emergency, in times of crisis, that the access to knowledge remains open. The most challenging aspect of designing a library is possibly projecting so far ahead into the future to try to kind of predict less so the fundamentals of a library. The fundamentals are always going to be there. We're always going to have content and users accessing that content, but it's everything else that surrounds that act that we want to make sure buildings and architecture can adapt, can become flexible, and can remain as open frameworks that allow the function to continue to exist and thrive in whatever environment we see in the future. We have to kind of make sure that anyone walking into the space instantly is guided by their intuition, even if they've never been in a library before, if they don't understand what a library is or does, or what they're supposed to do there. I think the design of a library needs to be much more open and intuitive and be able to guide someone through its use. So that's kind of a combination of the type of services that can happen be offered by the operator in a space. But again, a lot of that comes to designing and inviting an open and flexible space that can accommodate a variety of services and a variety of functions. I mean, how do you bring people inside? How do you design buildings that are able to not be limited by the boundaries of cultural norms and social kind of and social backgrounds? I think that's I think a big challenge that libraries of the future will have to really be more considerate of as the user becomes more and more diverse, as the user becomes more and more global. When we were approached by the University of Ottawa to think and envision the master plan, the library was 50 years old, and we looked at another 50 years into the future. And initially, the challenge seemed daunting, just even trying to imagine what a library of the future would look like. We decided not to go there because, again, we'll never figure out what type of technologies we'll have to accommodate. We started to look at really bringing it down to that very fundamental experience of a user in a space. What do they see? What do they feel? How does the light come in? How do the materials kind of engage them and inspire them? How do you create a sense of timelessness and suspension in a library to really allow you to kind of be immersed in the activity that you're there for? And once we started focusing on creating and looking at learning environments, all of a sudden these questions about technology started to kind of recede a little bit, because we knew that that's a moving target that's always going to be available for operators to integrate into a building that first and foremost focuses on the human experience. So I think once we started to do that, all of a sudden we started to we're able to reimagine the building as a kind of network of environments, a network of experiences that come together to create kind of a hub of learning and a hub of social activity on campus. And I feel like that type of thinking really allowed us to break beyond the kind of the boundaries of this library as a fortress of knowledge, and really opening it up to become a highly inclusive and highly transparent space that can offer a multitude of experiences. So that really helped us to kind of be able to think of libraries in such a dynamic and flexible way.